Hello and welcome to Japan Expert Insights and our discussion series on geopolitics in the Indo-Pacific and Japan's role in the region. Every second Monday, Dr. Stephen Nagy, Senior Associate Professor at the Department of Politics and International Studies at the International Christian University in Tokyo, and host Maya Matsuoka host a discussion on the latest developments, new challenges, and shifts in the geopolitics of the Indo-Pacific region. In this podcast, we welcome comments, questions, and opinions, so if you haven't done so yet, join us next time. In the meantime, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload audio episodes on the Japanese politics, business insights, and the Japan's role in the Indo-Pacific region. And good evening, good morning to everybody who joined us just now, depending on where you are in the world. Stephen, the floor is yours.
All right, Maya. So again, good morning, and good morning to everyone that has joined our clubhouse room on the geopolitics of the Indo-Pacific. It's an early morning here in Calgary, where I am right now, for a family vacation, which is great. I think it's a little bit later. It's coffee time for Eleanor, and I think in Tokyo it's in the evening. So we have a lot of different people from around the world, which is great. Today's topic is looking at the Indo-Pacific from the view of Taiwan and China. And what I'd like to do when I'm kind of unwrapping this I think very delicate equation is I want to look at it from the point of view of Taiwan and China, so how they see the Indo-Pacific region. But then I want to look at it from a secondary level, is looking at how other countries may view the Indo-Pacific and where Taiwan and China fit within that. Because I think these are slightly different ways to get a good sense of why I brought this topic up, but why the Indo-Pacific is increasingly important for Taiwan and China in different ways. And I think House of Representatives Nancy Pelosi's potential visit to Taiwan somewhat ties into at least how many countries are looking at Taiwan, and what are some of the pluses and minuses of this. And I know Tom and I were exchanging messages about this, and I think probably this is one of the reasons why he's logged on. So let's first take a look at the Indo-Pacific from the view of China. China looks at this as primarily a geopolitical construction. They look at it as a way to decenter China from the region's economic, diplomatic, and political architecture. From their point of view, the region has continued to evolve towards a so-called Asia-Pacific centered architecture, which places China at the center of the Asia-Pacific. And when I'm talking about the center, I'm talking about the center of its political economy, where basically all economic roads lead to Beijing because of production networks. They see the Asia-Pacific as a useful framing for looking at how China has reemerged and has become the dominant economy within the region. And this suits, I think, the current leadership in Beijing from the standpoint that they have really promoted this idea over the past 10 years since Xi Jinping came to power of achieving the China dream. That's rejuvenation of the Chinese people and the Chinese nation, and that the Asia-Pacific, with China at the center of the Asia-Pacific, really, it suits that narrative very, very, very strongly. So bringing in this idea of an Indo-Pacific, which re-centers the regional architecture across the Pacific and into the Indian Ocean, and includes India, decenters China from the center of the regional architecture, and makes it a much less China-centered region. And this is problematic for the party. It's problematic for how China views itself within the region. And what it also does is it inculcates a huge number of other partners through the literal parts of the Indo-Pacific region as stakeholders into how this region is evolving. I think importantly as well, it brings in the second largest populated country in the world, or first, depending which statistics you believe, that's India, into this geopolitical construct, which again provides a balance to China's size as a country, but also the potential for India to replace some of China's economic power that really is centered in its global production network. So I think that China views, again, this as primarily through the lens of an American-led geopolitical construct to decenter China from the region's political economy, so that it can either contain China's rise or stop China's rise, and that this is something that, again, goes against the Chinese Communist Party's view. Now, when we pivot to Taiwan, Taiwan is really interesting, and it's a different kind of species. in the fact that it is a political entity. It has had several peaceful transitions of democratic power, that it has a functioning democratic state, rule of law, relatively well governed, and it's received applause for not only its COVID response, but its response throughout the region in terms of how it's tried to engage in terms of development, in terms of developing its economic links to the region through its so-called Southern policy, and in general being seen as a productive partner for many countries within the region, although not as at the non-state level. As Taiwan looks at the so-called Indo-Pacific strategy or Indo-Pacific framing of the region, it raises many questions. One is, where does Taiwan fit within this Indo-Pacific region? How can Taiwan, if in the current status quo position, be a more active partner within the region? How can it instrumentalize this Indo-Pacific strategy to preserve Taiwan's, I think, enduring interest, which is to maintain the status quo and likely prevent the reunification of Taiwan with China, but in the same framework have the continued benefits of that strong economic relationship that Taiwan enjoys with China. So these are really interesting questions that I think the Taiwanese are looking at, and what we've seen over the past 2 or 3 years in particular is Taiwan has become a more central, it's taken a more central place in the discussions about the Indo-Pacific and where does Taiwan fit within that region. Now, some people like myself have talked about it in terms of sea lines of communication. Some have also talked about it in terms of the Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturing company, with Taiwan really being the epicenter of the production of the most sophisticated semiconductor chips that go into our jet fighters and our Apple computers and in our signature industries that come out of Japan and Korea, such as the car industry, and that breakdown or a bottleneck in the semiconductor supply would affect the broader Indo-Pacific region. So that Taiwan is an important part of that. And the Taiwanese policymakers are understanding that, but they're also trying to create new narratives that help inculcate them into the Indo-Pacific region. And when I was in Ottawa just last week, talking with some Taiwanese officials about how they understand the Indo-Pacific, they're not only linking it towards to the semiconductor industry and to sea lines of communication and, of course, preserving their form of governance, but they're also talking about how Taiwan can offer new ideas about how to deal with indigenous issues, how to deal with diversity issues, so as a normative power within the region to shape some of the concepts and ideas about governance within the region. And they did this within the context of so-called One China policy, or maintaining the status quo, which I found really, really interesting. So as an alternative to an authoritarian mode of governance, and that they viewed their role within the Indo-Pacific as an alternative form of governance to the authoritarian China. So that's the Taiwanese position, and I'm not speaking as a Taiwanese, of course, but from how I understand and Taiwan and in engagements with Taiwan and Taiwanese officials. Now, the third area that I want to mention in this discussion, which I think is important, is how do other countries view the Indo-Pacific framing, and how do they view Taiwan and China's place within the Indo-Pacific framing. And here I think that there's several different dynamics going on, and there's not one a real understanding of both Taiwan and China. So, for example, when we look at Japan, Japan has been very explicit about the importance of Taiwan in Japan's security, but when they're talking about its position within the Indo-Pacific region broadly, they are creative in their policy making in terms of trying to find ways to include Taiwan in international organizations, in the framing of the Indo-Pacific region, whether it is the U.S.-Taiwanese economic agreement that they put forward after the Indo-Pacific economic framework, or finding other ways to include Taiwan within the region. And that is purposeful because they understand the importance of Taiwan, again, as in sea lands of communication, in terms of semiconductor production, but also in terms of an alternative form of governance. And I think the United States and Japan share a similar view here. But on the U.S. side, when they're looking at Taiwan in the Indo-Pacific, they view it through the lens of primarily through security. What it means if Taiwan was forcibly reunified by China, and how this would affect the United States' broader engagement within the Indo-Pacific region. And from the United States' point of view, a reunified Taiwan by force and most likely by peace, would likely mean that the United States would be locked out of not only the first island chain, but also the second island chain, really causing the U.S.-led security architecture within the region to collapse. And of course, if that occurred, the broader Indo-Pacific region, or Indo-Pacific strategy, would also collapse. Other countries and associations or unions, such as the European Union, the Netherlands, Germany, and France, in their various formulations of the Indo-Pacific strategies, look at indirectly Taiwan's position within the region as reflective of an assertive authoritarian state trying to reshape the Indo-Pacific region or the Asia-Pacific region in a way that favors their system and prejudices rules a rules-based order. And their view is that it's really, really critical to continue to support a rules-based order within the Indo-Pacific region, to keep trade flows going, to keep supply chains going, and again, to preserve and ensure that a rules-based order under the current international law system, or a system that continues to evolve based on consensus, not by force, as we've seen in the Ukraine, with Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, that through consultation, through consensus making, that whatever rules-based order that continues to emerge will be one that focuses on rules, not power. So the European Union has a very, I think, an interesting perspective on how they're looking at it. And then we have other countries that have become online. I think South Korea is really, really interesting. Australia is really interesting. That have both now spoke about the importance of Taiwan in the Indo-Pacific region, again, through the lens of economics, through the lens of governance, through the lens of ensuring that power is not the fundamental way that problems are solved within the region. So these countries are looking at both Taiwan and China through the lens of how can we strengthen the status quo between Taiwan and China, so that force doesn't become the arbiter of how this long-standing division or separation of Taiwan and China does not solve by force. But they also understand the usefulness of the Indo-Pacific framing, including Taiwan, into that, because Taiwan is a force of good governance, is a force of again, peaceful democratic transition of power, and it is a counter-narrative to the CCP's focus that democracy and good governance and rule of law are not alien forms of governance to so-called Chinese civilization. They also understand the Indo-Pacific region not through the lens of containing China, but through constraining and shaping Chinese behavior. And I think this is really, really important when we're thinking about why the Indo-Pacific framing has emerged. It's that it's trying to shape Chinese behavior from the outside by building institutions and building norms and building practices through diplomatic, economic, and political engagement with the littoral states of the Indo-Pacific, such that they become a center of economic gravity, institutional gravity, political gravity, and now with instruments such as the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, a standard-setting gravity that will shape how the economy, governance, political systems will emerge and continue to develop moving forward. And this seems to be the view of many Indo-Pacific proponents, especially Australia, South Korea, Japan, the United States, and some European actors, of the importance of the region and importance of building a region that can constrain the behavior of China, not contain it, because they continue to understand that the economic benefits that can be accrued through a relationship with China will continue to be important for global growth, for supply chains, for trade, and for prosperity, and that they're trying to find a particular balance as they build their Indo-Pacific engagement. So with that, I'm going to stop there. I'd love to hear other ideas and views about the Indo-Pacific region, speaking about Taiwan and China. So I'll stop there.
Lynn.
So before asking questions, I would like to share some of my very positive experience about both Taiwan and China, because I think that individual experience about something really affects how we think about an international relation issue. So I visited Taiwan for the first time in 2016, and then 1 year later I visited China. So it were about 5 or 6 years ago when I had no idea about politics and international relations. And if I see a topic like the topic of our discussion today, Taiwan, China, and the Indo-Pacific, I could say that I could never imagine that how much tension in the region and how much tensions in the relationships between China and Taiwan. Because I myself do not see Taiwan as part of China, and I feel both differently and separately. So for Taiwan, I would say that my impression about it is a very peaceful island area. Even when on my last day in Taiwan, I witnessed a big demonstration, which I rarely see in my home country. But to my observation, people joining the demonstration very in order and peacefully, and it was not something as serious as some pictures on the social media posted. So I would say that my impression for Taiwan until now is a very peaceful place. Even when I started learning about international relations for the past 2 years, I've heard a lot of news about the tensions in the Taiwan Straits, the South China Sea, and the East China Sea. Similarly, I also had a personal positive experience with China. So, the year I visited China was when there were many warnings about the serious air pollution in China, especially in major cities like Beijing. And I did prepare for that. However, when I arrived in Beijing, I was very surprised because it is very clean, modern, in order, and I simply really love it. And when I studied in Japan, I would say that I have quite a lot of close relationship with Chinese friends. So even when my research mentioned a lot about China's assertiveness in the South China Sea, and when I asked my Chinese friends that what they think and how they feel when I started a survey saying China is the least trustworthy partner in the Southeast Asian region, they told me that they don't really care about it. So, what I learned and what I did for my research, I would say really different from my impression and my positive experience about both Taiwan and China. And until now, that kind of my impression about Taiwan and China hasn't changed. So I think that's one of the first questions that I would like to ask Professor Stephen is how your personal experience affect your view about the Taiwan issue? Because I think it's interesting that you are a Canadian and you had working experience in Hong Kong, I think also in China, and you spent so many years living and working in Japan, so the Asian region in general. So how your personal experience shape your current views?
Thank you very much, Lynn. It's good to hear from you. And yeah, I think that your personal experiences do impact how you understand issues. Like you, I've been to both Taiwan and China. I have many friends in both places. But I'm also, and I lived in Hong Kong for quite a while. And this has, again, giving me some experiences in terms of helping shape my understanding. I think over the past 10 years, my understanding of both places has probably changed. I think that in terms of China and governance, I think issues such as the environment have been real areas of success for China in terms of improving its situation. As you mentioned, in terms of the environmental issues in Beijing and Shanghai, they've dramatically improved, and that is something to be applauded for. And in the case of Taiwan, I've always been impressed by how vibrant the democratic system is, how open it is, how they look at history in a much more honest way within the region, and how the past is the past, and they look at from a cooperative relationships with countries and formal imperial powers like Japan. That being said, I think that when I look at some of the challenges associated with China, I cannot help not to think about what's happened in Hong Kong and the crushing of civil society, the use of the national security law to, again, to fundamentally reshape how Hong Kong works. I think this is an important barometer for what the kind of governance system could mean to Chinese civilization cities or political entities within the region. I think that the belligerence and the threats across the Taiwan Straits are not productive. I think the selective amnesia about history is very interesting to be following in the Chinese context. And I think that the broader salami slicing of the region to really push out the United States and create regional hegemony has, I don't want to say colored my visions, because I think that these are empirically provable statements. On the Taiwanese front, again, I think it's a successful democratic society that has transferred power and relatively educates its people well about the past. And when I'm thinking about their positions within the Indo-Pacific and how important Taiwan is for the Indo-Pacific, I think that really it represents, again, an alternative form of governance that contradicts many of the claims of the mainland government. And I think it is a positive force that we should continue to support. But I think we should continue to support within a self-defined one China policy, not a one China policy that is defined by China.
Eleanor, how about you?
Hi, good morning from DC. I have yet to get my coffee, Stephen. I actually drank a smoothie earlier, so I'm kind of full right now, but it's great to be here as always. I was going to perhaps incorporate some of my comments on the latter half of Stephen's talk about perhaps how Japan sees Taiwan, first of all. And I think someone asked a question about Nancy Pelosi, so I can insert some of those comments and bring a more U.S. perspective, and maybe if that's all right with you all.
Yeah, introduce yourself, Eleanor. Who do you work for?
Okay, sure. So I recently graduated from Georgetown's Master's in Asian Studies program, and I'm an expert contributor for EconView, which is a Chicago-based outlet of economic news and analysis. And as Stephen knows, I recently did publish a piece on the late Prime Minister Abe's legacy in shaping Japan-Taiwan relations for the Japan Times. If anybody's interested in reading it, I can share the link in the room chat after I stop speaking. So from the Japan side, first of all, I do think, particularly since, as I wrote in my piece, Abe's efforts in shaping Japan-Taiwan relations will be one of lasting consequence. That's basically how I'm going to sum up my piece. But, and it's quite coincidentally, my piece was published when Japanese officials were actually in Taiwan. That wasn't planned or anything, but it's how it turned out. And even President Tsai Ing-wen herself, she did, I think, say within the past few days that despite Abe's passing, Japan-Taiwan bilateral relations are stronger than ever. And my anticipation, as I put in my piece, is that even with Abe's death, I do think that leaders from both Tokyo and Taipei will make sure that Taiwan is incorporated into multilateral fora, regional fora as well as multilateral fora. Regional being, I'd say, for example, CPTPP, and from a multilateral standpoint, perhaps hope next year's World Health Assembly, as Taiwan joining as an observer, not as a full-on member, because it cannot do that. So I'll end there from the Japan side, because I know some people are interested in the Nancy Pelosi side, and I think I can I guess, explain a little bit more of what's going on there. So the past few weeks, so many people in Washington have, garnered headlines for saying, having their own takes on Nancy Pelosi's trip. So what happened is that the Financial Times basically broke news that Nancy Pelosi might be visiting Taiwan as part of her Asia trip, because Congress right now is in recess. And she was supposed to visit Asia, I think it was April or May, but she caught COVID. So that's why she didn't go to Asia then. But this time, there was speculation that she might visit Taiwan. She'd be the first Speaker of the House to visit Taiwan since Newt Gingrich, I want to say around 25 years ago. And that immediately, not only garnered headlines, but quite a bit of concern among many elite members of the think tank community, I would say, especially, and of course, intelligence community as well, because Nancy Pelosi herself has never publicly commented on the matter, confirming as in whether or not she will go to Taiwan. Biden was asked about it. I think he was on his way somewhere, I can't remember where, and he said, basically that the military doesn't think that's a good idea. And then Nancy Pelosi herself said, I think the next day, that, her travel itinerary is a matter of national security, in that she never tells people where she's going. So even if, for example, she's going to London, she's not just going to announce that. So I think it's more about, sub rosa visits. So at this point, I read somewhere early, shortly before this call, that Taiwanese officials have confirmed, somebody is confirming that she may visit Taiwan tomorrow night. And so she did announce that she's visiting Japan, Singapore, South Korea, and Malaysia with and members of her delegation are all Democrats. So this is not a bipartisan trip. But if she does visit, China has, threatened some sort of reaction that's greater than, or, beyond the normal reaction of when U.S. congressional members or high-ranking officials visit. I did see that a Global Times commentator tweeted a few days ago about, shooting down her plane, and Twitter quickly deleted or suspended his account for violating user agreements. So he did deleted that tweet afterwards. I think he's active again. But to answer whoever asked if she's going to visit, I have no special insights, but if she does visit, I mean, I think, it's there are going to be so many headlines and takes from, let's say, among many people in the DC community. So I'll end my comments there. But
Thanks, Eleanor. So I'm fully on board with your view about the continuation of deepening Taiwanese-Japan relations at the non-state level, and that the Japanese government is going to continue to find opportunities for Taiwan to take part in international organizations as an observer or some kind of associate position. And your point about finding opportunities to cooperate either through the CPTPP or other kinds of international agreements. But I do think there's limits to how far that relationship will go, and we can talk a little bit more about that. On Nancy Pelosi's visit, we'll see. Again, I think that not going is probably not the right message that we want to send to our security partners and allies within the region, that threats and use of force and military exercises, live military exercises across the Taiwan Straits can be used to control and to force the United States not to do what it would like to do within the region. That sends the signal to alliance partners, whether it's Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, or others, that the United States can be deterred through force. So my view is that we need to find a delicate way to make the visit happen, but how that visit happens and what transpires and how much that will be promoted is a different question. And my personal view is that the visit should happen, but it should happen quietly, and it should not be used to poke the panda, as they say, so that the United States can save face, but also China can save face, and they can find opportunities to move their relationship as it stands now towards very, very glacial and incremental lines of communication and developing possibilities for cooperation.
Yes, there have been indeed different opposing views about whether Nancy Pelosi should visit Taiwan, and if she does, when it should be, and so on. So, yeah, thank you for the for the input, Stephen, and Eleanor. Thank you for the insights there too. And Chao Ting, hello, thank you for coming up.
Hello, good evening. Hello, Stephen. Good evening. So you are just discussing the possible visit from Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan. This is really also very hot topic in Chinese social media. And today morning, I have discussed with some scholars and political science PhD students about this possible visit. Probably I can share our discussion with you guys. The majority of the Chinese participants of this discussion believe the likelihood of this visit is very, very high. Why? First, the Chinese military, PLA, the People's Liberation Army, has started some military exercise surrounding Taiwan. As far as I know, 5 military exercises have been started. I mean, the Chinese side have started a military exercise already. We just want to send a signal of warning to Taiwan and the United States. If this signal has been already sent, but Nancy Pelosi does not visit Taiwan, this is a possible signal that the U.S. Has shown its weakness in front of Chinese voting. So this is not good for the image of the U.S. I think the allies and partners of the U.S. in Indo-Pacific will have doubt about the capabilities of the U.S. Especially its deterrence, right? So I think if China has not started the military exercise, probably it's more likely that Nancy Pelosi will not visit Taiwan. But now Chinese PLA has already started the military exercise. I think Nancy Pelosi has no choice but to visit Taiwan. This is the first reason. And the second, we can look at the mobilization of U.S. military forces. Now, the aircraft carrier striking group Reagan has entered South China Sea, and some other large military ships are also surrounding Taiwan. I'm saying the U.S. Navy ships are around Taiwan. This is another signal. And I have seen some news. Some U.S. military aircraft has arrived in Okinawa from the homeland of the U.S. So this is a signal of the U.S. Side. I think there must be some reason for such mobilization of U.S. military forces. If Nancy Pelosi will not visit Taiwan, why should the U.S. mobilize so powerful military forces? I think this is a very strong signal that Nancy Pelosi will visit Taiwan. If Nancy Pelosi has no that plan to visit Taiwan, I think it's unnecessary for U.S. to mobilize such powerful military forces. This is a very strong signal to Chinese side. And the third reason, we cannot ignore the character of Nancy Pelosi. She is a very tough woman, very, very tough. Do we remember her behavior when Donald Trump made his speech of State of the Union? Nancy Pelosi has destroyed his manuscript of the speech in front of the world. Okay, so Nancy Pelosi is really a tough woman. And now Chinese President Xi Jinping has warned the U.S. side of not playing with the fire. I don't think Nancy Pelosi will retreat. Nancy Pelosi will be afraid of Xi's warning. So we have to consider Nancy Pelosi's character. She has a very strong point of view against communism. Okay, and 30 years ago, she appeared in Tiananmen Square to protest the crackdown of Chinese government against Jews for democratic movement. So we cannot ignore the character of Nancy Pelosi. So based on the three factors, most of us believe the visit of Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan is very likely. So this is our analysis. I think we have to consider the implication and the consequence of this visit. If Nancy Pelosi really visits Taiwan, I think the consequence can be very serious. Why? Because Chinese President Xi Jinping has warned the U.S. side of not doing so. But now, Nancy Pelosi still visits Taiwan without respecting the warning of Chinese side. This will have serious political consequences. Now the time is very sensitive. In October, China will hold the 20th Party Congress of Communist Party, right? So before this Party Congress, Xi Jinping has no any room to show his failure in the international arena. He has no room to do that. I think Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan is a public humiliation for Chinese president. I think this will have consequences for Chinese domestic politics. So let's see what will happen. I think 1 day or 2 days later, we will see the result. So this is some update from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Chao Ting. I agree with everything you said, and I'd like to drill down into the point about the domestic consequences of the visit for Xi Jinping, because I think this is actually really quite interesting. And some of the analysis I've read from in China and discussions with my colleagues in China, very interesting to see the factional politics looking at, and in fact, some groups hoping for Xi Jinping to be humiliated with Nancy Pelosi's visits to weaken him before the 20th Party Congress, which I found was really, really interesting. And again, it goes with a broader trend that there are unhappy factions within the Chinese political context, and it's not a monolith. In fact, there is a lot of jockeying to try and strengthen Xi's position or weaken Xi's position, and that Nancy Pelosi's visit is being instrumentalized by some to weaken Xi's position before the 20th Party Congress. What are your views on that?
I don't know. So I have no reliable information. But we can only make some political analysis, because she has explicitly warned the U.S. president, okay, don't visit Taiwan, don't play fire. The consequence is dangerous. He has made a very strong warning. But if Nancy Pelosi ignores his warning, she will lose his face. Okay, face is so important for Chinese politicians, especially for Xi. Xi Jinping is trying to create an image of a greater leader who can achieve the greater rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. This is the source of his. This is the source of the legitimacy of his rule for the third term. Right? So I think the consequence can be that Xi Jinping is not in the position to stop the visit of Nancy Pelosi. This is very bad for his image.
Again, does that mean? Go ahead, Eleanor. Yep.
Yeah, just to add to Xiaoting's way, I think it's important that we do talk about how, yes, even this past week, President Xi spoke with Biden. And I think from the U.S. side, one of the frustrations about the talk behind, Nancy Pelosi's possible visit is, how the Biden administration, to some people, doesn't have hasn't been able to consistently articulate, what is the Biden administration's approach to the One China policy. I think part of it is because, there have been multiple times in which Biden has said at CNN or when he was in Tokyo before the Quad meeting that, the U.S. will clarify, it will defend Taiwan in the event that Beijing unilaterally changes the status quo in the Taiwan Strait. So I think one of the other frustrations with, the Beijing leadership is perhaps that, the Biden administration is signaling inconsistency in their One China policy in terms of how they see, whatever, gestures the Congress takes in terms of the increased visits or increased engagement with Taiwanese counterparts here in DC or elsewhere is going beyond the red line that the Xi Jinping has drawn perhaps in regards to Taiwan's political status. But yeah, just wanted to incorporate that because I do think, Biden, the thing about, there is quite a bit of difference between how some members of the Biden administration approach Taiwan as a political issue versus Congress, which, I would say, good or bad, the Taiwan itself is a big, there's quite a bit of bipartisan support when it comes to Taiwan. And that's kind of rare to have that much, bipartisan support when it comes to a certain issue. And Taiwan is one of the things that actually unifies Congress. But at the same time, Congress right now, it's a Democrat majority. So to see this kind of divergence, and Biden, of course, is a Democrat. So to see this kind of divergence in the Democratic Party itself over Taiwan is quite interesting as well. So sorry for reinserting myself there.
But the United States doesn't function as a monolith, and I think it's actually to be expected, whether it's a Republican Party or a Democratic Party. It seems to function. Sometimes they're on the same page of the book, and sometimes they're not. And the nature of a divided government and the separation of powers allows for some divergence in policies, and that may explain this particular visit. But I'll stop there, and I think Marcus has tried to jump in a couple times.
I would say a short comment. If I was Nancy, a far stretch for me, what I would do, I would go on a military plane, low key, go in Taiwan without much splash, and show some pictures when I'm gone, 2 days later. And I think we are putting down the can, we are kicking down the can. It will come up more and more. So the US ought to create a coalition of people, of nations which feel threatened by China. And unfortunately, we are running into a Cold War with China. And I'm a child of the Cold War in Europe, so I think it's not a good choice. But unfortunately, that's going to happen.
Thanks, Marcus. I tend to think a low-key visit that publicizes photos afterwards would probably be the smart choice and would allow for, again, what Xiaoting mentioned in terms of a face-saving mechanism for Xi, if that is at all possible, that if Nancy does visit. We'll have to see, right? I think she's scheduled to visit maybe tonight or tomorrow. And again, we'll see how she does it and if she does make a big show of it. I think the Taiwanese side would like to keep it as low-key as possible. But yeah, let's bring in some other voices as well.
Well, we've got Meiran. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Sorry, it's very early for me. I just accidentally woke up, found your room. I'm on the West Coast, so this is way early. It's like 4:49.
Oh, you get the award today. I thought I got the award for the early shift.
No, I said just go up. This is interesting. I'm very interested in the subject. Actually, I think this is deeper than that. If you look at what's happening with the Obama twist to the pivot to Asia, and now we have seen Biden twice saying that we will defend Taiwan, and with Abe trying to focus on China more than other Japanese leaders, I think it's just a changing in the position of U.S. regarding Taiwan. I mean, I think we are moving towards being less ambiguous that we will defend Taiwan, and Japanese want that too. Once we declared, and everyone believes, the pivot is going to be Asia, the strategic challenge is going to be China, then where do you think Tokyo wants to have that central line we used to have in Europe? Do they want it in Tokyo, or would they rather have it in Taiwan? I think Tokyo would want it to have it in Taiwan. I mean, if there's going to be a place to challenge China, they would rather for it to be Taiwan than Tokyo. So I think Japan wants it. I think we have declared for past 10, 12 years that's what is going to happen. So I think this is just part of a gradual change, normalizing the fact that we are going to defend Taiwan. And this is just bringing the subject to the public. American public is not really to it yet, but with high-profile confrontations, with CCP directly challenging that we will shoot down the second in line to be president of the United States, this is something that's going to galvanize public support for a policy that maybe public is not ready for, but I think the thinkers think that's where we have to head. So I think this is part of a general conversation being brought to the public, and this is towards going to make it clear that we will defend Taiwan, and that's what AUKUS and Quad and all these things are telling us. That's where we're heading. So I think that's another angle we should look at it. I think this is more deliberate than just a fight between two branches of the government. I'm done now.
Thank you. I think those are really some interesting points, but I think we should also be aware of the nuanced position that Tokyo takes on China and Taipei. Last year, there was about $230 billion of trade with China. This is important for the sustainability of the Japanese economy. Tokyo looks at the Chinese economic relationship as critical to its sustainable future, and that they don't really have a choice of choosing between Taipei and Beijing. What they are trying to do is shape the relationship in a way that, again, that stresses supporting the status quo, ensuring that the broader region, and that's why this room's about the Indo-Pacific, brings in more extra-regional partners to shape the region that focuses on a rules-based order that tries to constrain Chinese behavior. And I think that is really, really critical for us to be understanding how Tokyo balances both Taipei and Beijing. It can't say no to the Chinese economic opportunity. At the same time, it can't say no to defending Taipei because of those critical sea lines of communication, the semiconductor industry. And I think there is also a sense of nostalgia over Taiwan, as so many Japanese people have visited Taiwan, they like Taiwan, and frankly and privately they say, this is what our relationship with China could have been, not the current relationship. So I think that's important. But when we're looking at the United States, on the other hand, they have geographic distance, which means that their calculations are different. And I think that you've made a really, really interesting point about galvanizing the U.S. public so that they'll have stronger support for Taiwan. But I think that, again, needs to be understood within the context of $540 billion of trade between that goes from the United States to China, and that Americans and American business as well see that relationship not only through the lens of security but also economic opportunity. And I don't see at least the business community having the same level of support for a robust approach to defending Taiwan as we may believe.
I just want to add, even Taiwan exported last year 125 billion to China. So the trade is going on. I mean, that's not going to stop. It's just changing the posture. And remember, Taiwan was, part of Japan from 1895 till World War II, and after that, PRC. So Taiwan hasn't been part of China for a long time.
I'm going to stay out of this particular point. I think that how we understand Taiwan and China and their relationship is really important. But again, I think we should also put it in the context of trade being so important for the partners within the region. And as a result, they're very sensitive to how they engage with Taipei and Beijing. This is a real challenge because I think at the domestic level, and when I talk to my Chinese colleagues a lot, especially the ones that are not very nuanced about this distinction, they think that the U.S. and other countries are actually going against the one China policy that they agreed to, and I think this is they're misinformed. That I don't think the United States and other countries have the same sense of a one China policy in the way that the Chinese do. At other levels, as Moran said and Marcus said, in terms of garnering support for the United States' position within the region. These are all plausible explanations, and I bring them all up because I think they're all possibilities.
But China, America's position in the Indo-Pacific is already well established. Why risk jeopardizing the stability of the region, which is fractious at best and pretty unstable at worst? Why exacerbate it more than you need to? You've got a global food crisis, a global energy crisis driven by the Ukrainian conflict. Why would the United States want to open a potentially, not necessarily military front, but just another front which then provides attention, focusing on NATO Bank of Europe? It just doesn't seem very sensible.
There are two dimensions to this aspect. One is geopolitics. The other one, what I sense, is the internal politics within US. Now, there has been a significant shift of US approach to geopolitics. And, if I may, choose to make some sweeping statements. Till about, 3 years back, the world order was US number one in terms of geopolitical power, China number two and emerging, Russia number three and falling. Right? The earlier regime within US understood this, and they focused their efforts into containing the rising number two, and probably taking the eyes off the number three, which was declining. Now, since the time Biden administration has come into being, the geopolitical shift has been to contain number three and let loose number two. And what we have seen is starting from the Afghanistan, where knowingly or unknowingly, the entire control of Afghan region has been handed over to the Chinese. I basically consider that as a huge geopolitical mistake, because somewhere I of the opinion, this is my personal opinion, that any number one power should not keep its eyes away from an emerging number two and focus its energy on declining number three. That was a geopolitical step which Biden administration took. To me, it doesn't sounds very sensible. That's point number one. Let's look at the internal politics of US currently. If you can see my DP, latest ratings of Biden job approval, the approval ratings of Biden is one of the lowest in its term. And considering the health and other details emerging out, there are of course people who want to put the hat into the ring. Kamala's rating isn't very great either, and I think the number two and number three within the US politics have also started to up the game. And Pelosi, Nancy, went ahead and refocused what the Biden administration was missing as a policy, is to refocus their energies and effort on to contain China, and she has brought the attention back to the Chinese problem. So this is again what I see. It's an internal hat throwing within the Democrat ecosystem in US. Ratings of Biden is falling. There's concerns with respect to health. Kamala's acceptability, is again a matter of concern within the Democrat Party, and hence Nancy has upped her game. So these are the 2 points where you would probably find the threats to the entire geopolitics which is currently being played out. I thought it would be worthwhile to share my opinion here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those views. I appreciate the nuance that you tried to bring out in your comments. Just a couple responses to your views. I think that the view that pivoting to number three as opposed to staying on the number two is, I think, a really important point. But the United States is a global power, and it does need to demonstrate that it can manage two different theaters at the same time. And I think this is why we continue to see the messaging and the action by the Biden administration to continue to focus on the Indo-Pacific region. And this is done through the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. It's done through the Quad Summit. And I don't think the Quad is a failure. I think actually it is a tremendous success in terms of how it's transformed from a primarily security initiative to something that is now providing public goods. I think that its engagement with Tokyo, Australia, India has all been positive, and Taiwan is now another piece of the puzzle that I think is important in terms of, again, creating stability and pushing back against number two. I guess I would differ with you on the use of containment. I think containing China is not possible, it's not desirable, and it's not feasible. All of China's neighbors, their biggest trading partner is China, and if the United States would like to have a sustainable and effective policy within the region, it must move away from a containment view about China and focus on economic engagement, diplomatic engagement, and of course security engagement within the region. And that means getting stakeholder buy-in and understanding that Tokyo, Seoul, Southeast Asia, even India cannot fundamentally change their economic relationship overnight with China. It will take decades. And as a result, any kind of Indo-Pacific strategy is going to have to accommodate the realities of the economic relationships within the region. And Taiwan is part of that equation.
Everybody whom I can see. And so here we've got Tiagi Ji. I hope that I don't pronounce the name. Hello.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks for and I was listening to what you guys were sharing. I just wanted to know, like, what are your thoughts on the fact that a lot of people, especially in India, feel that in the context of current cooperation between US and India, it seems a bit more platonic in the sense that US is cozying up with India primarily because it knows that in order to counter China, India is someone with whom they can partner, and not per se a relationship that is has a bit more foundation in terms of the friendship and whatnot. And I ask that because it's a tricky situation because India has had a relationship with Russia, and also the fact that Russia is cooperating with China a lot more, especially after its attack on Ukraine. So how do you see it all playing in the context of Russia, China, India, and US? And especially my question around do you think it has a lot more foundation, or is it a bit more platonic in terms of US causing up to India? So yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much. I've never heard the expression plutonic and India and United States in the same
I would superficial maybe.
Yeah. Okay. No, I got the connotation. I thought it was quite good. It's a great expression that it's a relationship that's not deeper, and I think that's your meaning. I think that probably that again Japan and its engagement with India in the post-World War II period, but in particular under the former Prime Minister and late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who invested a huge amount of time in India and building that personal relationship. I would say that relationship is fundamentally deeper than the U.S.-India relationship. But where they share the same vision is the potential for India to be a credible and important partner amongst Japan, Australia, and the United States in helping shape the region. And I think there is a view in all the capitals that I mentioned that it's really important to bring in India as an emerging state, but as an equal partner to help shape the region's norms and institutions to demonstrate that it's not just a Western-led order. In fact, that India plays a critical role as an emerging state that represents emerging countries and that is at the table in helping shape rules. And I think that is really an important part. And I do think Canberra, Tokyo, and Washington acknowledge that. And I think they really value that, despite some of the challenges of working with India on security matters. India, again, I think depending on which capital you are in, is viewed as a problematic democracy, or as a vibrant democracy, or as a democracy that is flawed. And this, of course, it creates challenges of incorporating India into more of a value-led approach to the Indo-Pacific region. But that said, it continues to be really important in terms of bringing in another democratic state, again, an emerging state that can bring tremendous resources to the region. So I would not say it's platonic, but I would not say they're celebrating their platinum wedding anniversary either. They're somewhere in between, probably closer to getting married than the platinum anniversary.
And if I can add to that, is my connection stable?
Much better. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So if it does come in and out, could you let me know, just so that I'm not just talking to myself? So yeah, the Indian, Russian, Chinese, American war are incredibly, I think, fascinating to look at in the context of Southern Asia. I think it's important to keep in mind that India gets a disproportionately large amount of its arms and military equipment from Russia. And given again Ukraine's war, this has had a obviously huge impact on Russia's military and industrial capacity, and therefore the ability for it to supply foreign partners, not necessarily allies. And we've seen them going to Iran to get drones. So this is huge for India's national security. It's huge for its defense. And with the skirmishes between China in 2020, this is a big concern to the Indian government. But that being said, it doesn't mean necessarily that India is going to come and jump at the opportunity to get closer with the United States. The US has been trying to warm up to India to warm up to them for decades, and the Indians very deliberately have kept them at arm's length. So, that's exhibited in how Modi was really he only really sort of welcomed second level face to face. Everybody else saw junior members during this flurry of diplomacy we saw earlier in the year. So, I think that over time, you are going to see an actual alignment between India and America grow, but I don't think it's going to increase to India becoming an ally, because they just don't want to put all their eggs in one basket. The Quad is a hugely important role. The role of Abe, rightly said, he was huge in garnering relations with Japan to an extent we haven't seen in many decades, and obviously Japan and America's relationship. And just to bring in the Taiwanese question again, were there to be some kind of growing insecurity in the Southeast Asian part of the China Sea, then, well, India's not just going to ignore that. They're well aware of China's role in Sri Lanka and the economic turmoil there now. So they're not just going to shy away from that either. And so I just think, again, it would be a case of, as China's belligerency grows, it won't be a case of America pulling India. It'll be more a case of China pushing India towards a grower alignment with the. That's my thoughts on it.
Yeah, and that seems to be the pattern of behavior, is that the more assertive China is within the region, that we see a greater alignment of states. But that doesn't mean an alliance. It means alignment on issues that they can cooperate on. And it goes back to my point. I think that there's definite limitations to how much India can cooperate on the security front, but the economic front, diplomatic front, and other areas, I think that there's more room, and that will continue. But I'll stop there because I think we have other views that people wanting to jump in.
Yeah, sure. Is it okay if I just a quick question follow up, if you don't mind?
Sure.
Only if you're okay. Yeah. And this is more of like a curiosity question. How do you see, because a difference in terms of the leadership or the relation between when Manmohan Singh was the prime minister, as opposed to Modi being the prime minister? I'm sure that they have different styles of leadership and interacting. Do you see and how has that changed in terms of the relationship between the countries? And I'll just move to audience. So yeah.
So I think there's a couple levels here. So first of all, how has the international stage changed, and how has China changed? How has the United States changed? So China, of course, has become more assertive under Xi Jinping. I think the United States has become less stable over the past two presidents in terms of its domestic divisions. And of course, we've had COVID. We've had a whole bunch of different levels that have impacted how India can be seen by others and how others see India. So I think that's an important barometer. I think that Mohammed Singh was a very different leader. He was not the Hindu nationalist that I think Modi is. I think that he had a different vision for India. I think that Prime Minister Modi, I think, has a certain charisma associated with his ambiance and his relationship with figures like Abe. So I think that there's so many different levels we can take this, but India's importance on the international stage has increased. The understanding of its potential has remained the same. And I have to be honest, the realism about reaching that potential has become more acute, in that I think we all see India as a huge potential, but it doesn't seem to be able to move that potential into reality. And that hasn't changed under both prime ministers.
Yeah, thanks.
Actually, hi. I think, India is important. As you said, it's a problematic democracy. But Modi has not been good for India either. I mean, this government is like Trump on steroid when it comes to issues of Indian politics, uniting the people in India. I mean, we want a democratic India. We don't want a racist India. And also, I want to mention the deep ties that existed between India and Soviet Union, especially in the military industry. And that's going to take time to actually decouple from that. I mean, India is really dependent on Russian parts and technology for the military, and they are moving away from it gradually, and I think that's the way forward. But Modi is an issue. I think it's not good for Indians to continue with those policies.
I'm going to refrain from this. I'm going to refrain from commenting on what is good for India because I'm not an Indian expert. I'm just commenting on my broad, kind of a macro level experience. I think that would save those comments about India's state of democracy maybe for another discussion.
Well, thank you for that, Mehran. And Kami, hello.
Hi, thank you so much. What an excellent discussion. I really enjoy your club and rooms, Maya and Stephen. My question is, knowing what you know now and what you see happening with China and Taiwan, if you could affect change, what top 3 things you would put into effect? And these 3 things could be economic, they could be political, they could be diplomatic. What would those 3 changes be, knowing what you know now and where you think the region is headed towards? Thank you.
Thanks, Kami. This is a really tough question, but it revolves around the cross-strait relations between Taiwan and China, or Taipei and Beijing. So there's some really interesting parallels, or I guess ways we can be thinking about it. I'm Canadian. Our biggest neighbor is the United States. When these two countries were being formed, the United States could have taken over Canada, I think, quite easily. But they made an active choice that it was better to have a neighbor that had similar culture, similar institutions to build a more stable regional environment rather than an environment or a border that was consistently characterized by conflict or geopolitical stress. In that sense, there may be a logic that could be applied to the Taiwan-China relationship is that I personally think that China would be probably much better suited to continue to maintain the status quo, to continue to deepen economic relationships with Taiwan, to open up their economy and use this kind of bilateral relationship to build a more stable environment rather than talk about a reunification, potentially by force if necessary, and building up such an incredibly large military footprint within the region, which not only scares Taiwan, but there's tremendous worries in Tokyo, there's worries in Southeast Asia. These worries continue to deepen over the decades. So I think rethinking how they can build stability within the region, not through military power, but by creating a regional environment that focuses on shared benefits. Second, I think importantly, is going back to the view of the status quo. And third is going back to the fundamental principles of one country, many systems that Deng Xiaoping put forward. But here I'd like to turn to maybe Chao Ting or others to bring in their constructive ideas of what 3 ideas they may have to change the dynamics or improve the dynamics within the region.
Chao Ting, can you talk now?
Sorry. This question is too big for me, so I'm not in the position to answer the question. So if I may, probably I can make some comments to the containment. Just now we have discussed the potential containment of China. My opinion is slightly different from Stephen. Stephen has said the Indo-Pacific countries are not in the position to contain the rise of China, especially the U.S., because China is the biggest trading partner of many countries, more than 120 countries worldwide, as far as I remember, including Japan and probably U.S. So the economic foundation is very strong between China and other countries. Therefore, containment is not possible. My opinions are slightly different. I think the U.S. has tried to contain China, especially under the leadership of Trump. They have tried, but the Biden administration has found it's probably not realistic to contain China. The reason is the same as what Stephen has argued. Now, the U.S. administration, especially the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, has made it very clear the objective of the U.S. government is try to shape the environment of China, the external environment of China. this is a highest priority. U.S. is not trying to push any regime change inside China. The U.S. has no intention to tear down CCP regime in Beijing. The focus is the Indo-Pacific region, the strategic environment. So, I mean, China is one emerging power, and China has the capability and the intention to challenge the leadership of the U.S. Of course, the U.S. wants to contain China, but it's really difficult. This is number one. And number two, I think the economic relation is important, but compared to geopolitics and ideology, I don't think economics can play same important role as geopolitics and economics. Today's strong economic relationship between China and other countries is the product of the engagement policy of the U.S. U.S. has tried to integrate China into the international system, and then China will become more liberal and more open, more free. So this is a U.S. intention, but U.S. has failed. Okay, U.S. has failed, but this means the economic relation between China and the U.S. and other countries is just the product of the geopolitical policy of the U.S., namely engagement policy. But now U.S. has failed, and they have realized that China is now much more powerful, and China is not becoming liberal. China has now the capabilities to challenge the leadership of the U.S. Therefore, the U.S. has no choice but to contain China. But it's too difficult. That's why they want to shape the environment surrounding China. So my expression is probably not clear, but in summary, my argument is that first, U.S. has tried to contain China, but it's difficult now. Its focus and the priority is to shape the strategic environment of China. That's why we have seen the U.S. Has invested so much resource in Indo-Pacific strategy. The AUKUS defense airlines, the Quad and the Five Eyes airlines, and the G7 airlines. So this is my understanding of the geopolitical change between China and the U.S.
Stephen, do you have anything to add to this, or?
I think Xiaoting's comments are very accurate. I think we're dancing on the head of a needle here. I think we're both saying the same thing, that the United States understands the importance of engagement and constraining China. The Trump administration tried a containment strategy. It didn't work, and it wouldn't have worked. But again, this is primarily driven by geopolitics. But again, the preference for shaping is through economics and trade and institution building, not through a military confrontation or competition.
I just wanted to on Cami's points, if that's all right. It's absolutely absurd to think, not that anyone is, that containment would ever be a effective strategy. You can't contain, a superpower in the form of the Soviet Union, and we saw what happened when the Americans got desperate in trying to do so by propping up, fascist dictators and corrupt regimes. So the attempt to contain a country that is arguably more economically powerful if you measure it in PPP, or purchasing power parity, albeit it's very lopsided in its economic equality, is misguided. That being said, engagement is not, it's possible, and we've seen that in ways such as COP26 joint statements, the fact that the two leaders do engage and communicate, but it's very, very inconsistent. And so, we clearly are in this whole multi, or bipolar. We're in a multipolarity now. The United States is still the hegemonic power, but its power is waning because of primarily polarization in the domestic situation at home. But China's not in a position just to take over those reins. And the biggest accolade, as I've always emphasized, is the United States alliance network. They have been able to garner relationships with other countries around the world that China just hasn't and doesn't seem to be able to. They're trying to do that through these security pacts and develop not just multilateral leadership in the region, but mini AUKUS deals or specific economic or security pacts, sort of alignment deals, that sort of thing. But again, it's wholeheartedly supported. So the Americans, if you just want to emphasize the Americans, They need to find ways to emphasize areas to work together with the Chinese, transnational issues, terrorism, climate change, but they need to continue to, keep them, hold them on things like the Uyghurs, like their engagement with Taiwan, like the South China Sea and North Korea. North Korea is another file where the two countries have a similar, desire to want to ensure that the country remains stable or predictable at least, or at least see the country improve potentially. These aren't areas that you can build a long-standing constructive relationship on. There are just two, unfortunately, diametrically opposing views on things between the Chinese and the Americans that make it possible to really see long-term sort of, I don't know, cooperative relationship. I wouldn't even call it friendly. I mean, maybe competitive instead of adversarial, but we want to do very different things. And I think what would help the Americans is if they put more emphasis in the multilateral sphere, more emphasis in the UN, more emphasis in alliance building networks. But not appetite for that in the US domestic scene at the moment, but also by
You're breaking up again.
I'm breaking up, thanks, Maran. But what I'm trying to say is that there are opportunities for the Americans and the Chinese to work together, but very limited. So America should try to garner more support from other countries around the world and emphasize to them why they should be seen as the more responsible leader in the world. So I think someone's got a mic on. So I think it's needs to be kept in mind about not just only playing to the interests of China, but other countries around the globe that are seeking leadership from, two of the main leaders of the world.
So, Paul, can you hear me?
Thank you for having me, Maya. I think it's a I'm speaking from China, so it's 36 p.m. So I think it's gonna be a very interesting night for us to see the news that Nancy Pelosi will be visiting Taiwan, I think tomorrow night. So this is a very interesting English-speaking room since my compatriot are crowded in other rooms fighting and defending all those other opinions. So well, I think it's a very interesting thing that we're all going to be witness tomorrow or after that. And I don't know what you guys' opinion of Nancy Pelosi's act, but I think clearly it's not a consolidated decision by the President Biden or State Department or Congress. I think it's more of her personal show, a self-portrait of heroism after a very long and rather successful congressional career. And there will be consequences as well. I think, at least in China, if you check out all those websites, people are frenzied about what PLA might do tomorrow or day after tomorrow. And the military are all geared up and ready to operate any actions. So, well, I'm very, well, it's a little bit late, so I'm gonna wrap up here.
Thank you very much, Paul. I really appreciate that you could tune in from China to share your views and to share what's happening. Really, these rooms are not meant to exclude anyone, and we would like to welcome as many different voices as possible. I think, again, listening to the Chinese debates, the private debates, private discussions, there's a lot more variety than I think the public statements that you can get in the mainland press, and I think that's an important indication that there's not a monolithic view about understanding the Indo-Pacific or about understanding Taiwan or understanding China in the Chinese context, and that gives us some really important food for thought in terms of thinking about who is speaking for China on these issues. And I always, again, try to hear as many diverse views as possible, because I think that gives us a better sense of the heterogeneity of views within the Chinese context on so many issues, including Taiwan.
Thank you, Paul. And well, Stephen, are you okay with wrapping up the room now?
That would be great. So just let me reiterate that I think that when we're looking at the Indo-Pacific region, there's the Taiwanese view of the Indo-Pacific, there's the Chinese view of the Indo-Pacific, and then there's how other countries are viewing these two political entities and their place in the Indo-Pacific. And I think those are useful framings to try and get a sense of what are the stakes in the region, how the stakes are being instrumentalized, and how concepts like the Indo-Pacific are, again, being used by different stakeholders to, achieve their geopolitical issues, as Chao Ting mentioned or Eleanor mentioned. Let me just close and say thank you for what a vibrant exchange this morning, or where I am, or in the evening with you. Again, I encourage you to come back in a couple weeks for our next discussion and bring all these great ideas and openness to listening to other views and, again, learning from each other. So thank you very much. I hope everybody's well, and I look forward to our next session.
Thank you, Stephen. This was Japan Expert Insights on geopolitics in the Indo-Pacific and Japan's role in the region. Thank you for coming and staying with us today. We will be on air in 2 weeks on Monday at 8:30 p.m. Japan time again, so join us. Until then, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload audio episodes on Japanese politics, business insights, and the role of Japan in the Indo-Pacific region. If you want to stay informed about our upcoming events, you can follow us on Clubhouse, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Again, we are looking forward to your joining us next week. Until then, stay well and make every day count. See you.